On November 10th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, the largest and most celebrated freighter on the Great Lakes, departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with 26,000 tons of iron ore pellets bound for Detroit. It was late in the shipping season, and a major storm was brewing over Lake Superior. Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran of decades on the lakes, guided his massive ship into increasingly rough seas. By the evening of November 10th, the Fitzgerald was battling 25-foot waves and hurricane-force winds. At 7:10 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed the nearby ship Arthur M. Anderson to report, "We are holding our own." Less than 20 minutes later, at approximately 7:25 p.m., the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared from radar. The ship had sunk in Canadian waters, taking all 29 crew members with it. No distress call was ever sent. No one survived. The wreck wasn't located for days, and when it was found, the ship had broken in two on the bottom of Lake Superior, 530 feet down. This is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the deadliest shipwreck on the Great Lakes in modern times, and a maritime mystery that has haunted the lakes for nearly 50 years. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was launched on June 7, 1958, at the Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan. She was named after Edmund Fitzgerald, the president of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, which commissioned the ship. When she was christened, the Fitzgerald was the largest ship on the Great Lakes, 729 feet long, capable of carrying over 26,000 tons of cargo. The Fitzgerald was a marvel of Great Lakes engineering. She was what's called a laker, a bulk carrier designed specifically for the Great Lakes trade. Lakers have a distinctive design, long and narrow, to fit through the locks of the Sioux lock system that connects Lake Superior to the lower Great Lakes, with the pilot house, bridge, at the front and the engine room at the rear, and a long cargo hold in between. The Fitzgerald was built to carry taconite iron ore pellets from the mining regions of Minnesota and Michigan to steel mills in Detroit, Toledo, and other industrial cities around the lower Great Lakes. She was a workhorse, making dozens of trips every shipping season. The Great Lakes freeze in winter, so the shipping season runs roughly April to December, hauling thousands of tons of ore with each trip. But the Fitzgerald was also famous. She was the biggest, the fastest, and the pride of the Great Lakes fleet. Her crews took pride in serving on her. Sailors called her the pride of the American side and the Toledo Express because she set speed records. When the Fitzgerald pulled into port, people came to see her. She was a celebrity ship. By 1975, the Fitzgerald had been sailing the Great Lakes for 17 years. She had carried millions of tons of cargo without serious incident. She was well maintained, regularly inspected, and captained by experienced officers. There was no reason to think November 10th, 1975, would be any different from thousands of other trips. Captain Ernest McSorley had been sailing the Great Lakes for over 4 decades. He had been captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald since 1972. He was 63 years old, experienced, respected, and known as a careful, competent commander. This was to be one of his final trips before retirement. The crew of the Fitzgerald numbered 29 men officers, deckhands, engine room crew, cooks. Most were experienced Great Lakes sailors. Many had families waiting for them at home. Some had sailed on the Fitzgerald for years. It was a good ship with a good crew. On November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald loaded 26,116 tons of taconite pellets at Burlington Northern Railroad, Dock No. 1 in Superior, Wisconsin. The cargo was destined for the Zug Island Steel Mill near Detroit. It was late in the season. The shipping season would close in a few weeks when ice made the lakes impassable. The Fitzgerald was making one more run before winter shut down the lakes. Weather forecasts indicated a storm was developing over the northern Great Lakes. This wasn't unusual. November is notorious for severe storms on Lake Superior. The lake is the largest, deepest, and coldest of the Great Lakes, and November storms can generate waves as large as ocean swells. Experienced captains knew to respect November storms, but they also knew that if you waited for perfect weather in November, you'd never sail. Captain McSorley reviewed the forecast and made the decision to proceed. The storm looked significant but manageable. The Fitzgerald was a large, modern ship, and McSorley had decades of experience navigating rough weather. On the afternoon of November 9th, the Edmund Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, heading east into Lake Superior. Also departing Superior around the same time was another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, captained by Bernie Cooper. The Anderson was carrying a similar cargo on a similar route. The two ships stayed in radio contact as they traversed Lake Superior. This was common practice, as ships would share weather information and coordinate to help each other if needed. By the morning of November 10th, both ships were well out into Lake Superior, heading roughly east-northeast toward the lower lakes. The weather was deteriorating as forecast. Wind was increasing, waves were building, and both ships were beginning to feel the effects of the storm. Captain McSorley and Captain Cooper communicated by radio and agreed to take the northern route across Lake Superior, staying closer to the Canadian shore. This route offered some protection from the worst of the storm, which was tracking from the southwest. They would pass north of Isle Royale and follow the Canadian coastline before turning south toward Whitefish Point and the passage into the lower lakes. By afternoon on November 10th, conditions were severe. The storm had intensified faster and more severely than forecast. Wind gusts were reaching 60 to 70 miles per hour hurricane force on the Great Lakes. Waves were building to 20, 25 feet, with some reports of waves over 30 feet. Both the Fitzgerald and the Anderson were taking a pounding. Around 3:30 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed Captain Cooper on the Anderson with concerning news. The Fitzgerald had sustained some damage. McSorley reported that the ship had a list, was leaning to one side, had lost 2 vent covers on deck, and had a fence railing damaged. He said the ship's pumps were running to remove water that had entered the ballast tanks. This was worrying, but not yet an emergency. Ships often sustain minor damage in severe weather. The fact that the Fitzgerald had a list and was taking on some water was concerning. But the pumps were handling it, and McSorley didn't sound panicked. He asked the Anderson to stay close and help with navigation. As the Fitzgerald's radar had also malfunctioned, the storm had likely damaged the radar antenna. Captain Cooper agreed to stay close and provide radar navigation assistance. The Anderson was about 17 miles behind the Fitzgerald, close enough to track on radar and provide information. Over the next few hours, the two ships maintained radio contact. The Fitzgerald was making progress toward Whitefish Point, where she would turn south and get into the lee shelter of the land, where conditions would improve. Both captains knew that once they reached Whitefish Point and got into Whitefish Bay, the worst would be over. At around 7 p.m., the Anderson made radio contact with the Fitzgerald to warn of a northbound ship, the Avafors, that would be passing near them. Captain Cooper asked Captain McSorley, "How are you making out?" McSorley's response was calm. "We are holding our own." That was the last communication anyone ever received from the Edmund Fitzgerald. At approximately 7:10 p.m., the Anderson's radar showed the Fitzgerald was about 10 miles ahead, approaching Whitefish Point. The Fitzgerald was on course, moving at good speed despite the storm. Everything seemed under control. Then suddenly the Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar screen. At first, Captain Cooper and his crew thought it might be a radar malfunction. The storm was playing havoc with electronics. They tried to raise the Fitzgerald on radio. No response. They checked the radar again. The Fitzgerald was gone. There was nothing where the ship should have been. Captain Cooper tried calling again. "Edmund Fitzgerald, this is the Anderson. Do you read?" Silence. Again. "Fitzgerald, this is the Anderson. Come in." Nothing. The crew of the Anderson realized something was terribly wrong. A ship doesn't just disappear from radar. Either the Fitzgerald had suffered a catastrophic equipment failure, or something far worse had happened. Captain Cooper immediately contacted the U.S. Coast Guard and reported that the Edmund Fitzgerald was missing from radar and not responding to radio calls. He provided the last known position and requested immediate search and rescue operations. The Coast Guard scrambled to respond, but the conditions were horrific. 25-foot waves, hurricane-force winds, darkness, and freezing temperatures. Coast Guard vessels and aircraft prepared to search, but reaching the area in those conditions would take time. The Anderson turned toward the Fitzgerald's last known position, searching with radar and spotlights. Other ships in the area were alerted and asked to assist, but as the hours passed with no contact from the Fitzgerald, the grim reality became clear. The Edmund Fitzgerald had sunk. The search continued through the night and into the next day. The storm gradually subsided, but there was no sign of the Fitzgerald. No lifeboats, no debris, no survivors. The Great Lakes had swallowed the ship and its 29 crew members completely. On November 14th, 1975, 4 days after the sinking, a U.S. Navy plane using magnetic detection equipment located the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in Canadian waters of Lake Superior, about 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Point. The ship was in 530 feet of water, far deeper than divers could safely reach in 1975. The wreck had broken into 2 large pieces lying close together on the lake bottom. The bow section was upright and relatively intact. The stern section was heavily damaged and on its side. The ship had clearly suffered a catastrophic structural failure. Importantly, there was no evidence that the crew had attempted to abandon ship. The lifeboats were still in their davits, launching positions. No life rafts had been deployed. This meant the sinking had been sudden so fast that there was no time to send a distress call, no time to launch lifeboats, no time to do anything. The ship had gone down in minutes, possibly seconds, taking everyone with it. All 29 crew members were lost. Officers: Captain Ernest M. McSorley, 63. First Mate John H. McCarthy, 62. Second Mate James A. Pratt, 44. Third Mate Michael E. Armagost, 37. Deck crew: Watchman Carl A. Peckel, 20. Watchman John D. Simmons, 63. Deckhand Bruce L. Hudson, 22. Deckhand Mark A. Thomas, 21. Deckhand Ralph G. Walton, 58. Porter William J. Spengler, 59. Maintenance Thomas D. Benson, 23. Maintenance Blaine H. Wilhelm, 52. Engine room crew: Chief Engineer George J. Hull, 60. First Assistant Engineer Edward F. Binden, 47. Second Assistant Engineer Thomas R. Edwards, 50. Third Assistant Engineer Russell G. Haskell, 40. Oiler Ransom E. Cundy, 53. Oiler Frederick J. Beecher, 56. Oiler Thomas D. Borgson, 41. Wiper Eugene W. O'Brien, 50. Stewards, cooks: Robert C. Rafferty, 62. Alan G. Cullman, 43. Wheelsmen: John J. Poviach, 59. Joseph W. Mazes, 59. Paul M. Ripper, 22. Oliver J. Shampoo, 41. Special assignment: David E. Weiss, 22. They ranged in age from 20 to 63. They left behind wives, children, parents, and friends. None of their bodies were ever recovered. They went down with the ship and remain entombed in the wreck 530 feet below the surface of Lake Superior. The sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald was shocking. How could the largest, most modern ship on the Great Lakes sink so quickly in a storm? Great Lakes freighters had weathered November storms for over a century. What went wrong? Multiple investigations were launched. U.S. Coast Guard, National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, U.S. Navy, Canadian authorities. Underwater surveys of the wreck were conducted using submarines and remote-operated vehicles. The wreck was photographed and examined in detail. Experts analyzed the weather data, the ship's design, loading procedures, and every aspect of the final voyage. The investigations produced several theories about what caused the sinking, but no definitive answer. Nearly 50 years later, the exact cause remains debated. Theory 1: flooding through deck hatches. The most widely accepted theory is that the Fitzgerald took on water through damaged hatch covers. The ship had 21 large cargo hatches on the deck that could be opened to load ore into the cargo hold. These hatches were covered by heavy steel hatch covers held down by clamps. If the hatch covers were not properly secured, or if they were damaged by the severe seas, water could enter the cargo hold. With 25-foot waves washing over the deck, thousands of gallons of water could pour through even small openings. As water accumulated in the cargo hold, the ship would settle lower in the water, making it easier for more water to come aboard. This could create a progressive flooding situation that eventually overwhelmed the ship's pumps and caused the ship to founder, sink by filling with water. Evidence supporting this theory: Captain McSorley reported damage to deck equipment early in the storm. The ship developed a list, lean, suggesting asymmetric flooding. Examination of the wreck showed some hatch clamps were either missing or in a position suggesting they may not have been fully secured. Theory 2: structural failure. Another theory is that the ship's hull suffered a structural failure essentially. The ship broke apart from the stress of the waves. In severe seas, ships experience enormous stresses. As a wave passes under the ship, the bow and stern can be supported by the wave, while the middle section is unsupported, causing the ship to sag. Conversely, if a wave is under the middle of the ship with the bow and stern unsupported, the ship hogs. This sagging and hogging creates tremendous stress on the hull. The Edmund Fitzgerald was 17 years old and had carried millions of tons of cargo, subjecting the hull to years of stress and fatigue. Some experts believe the hull may have developed fatigue cracks that finally failed in the extreme conditions of November 10th. If the hull cracked or broke, water would flood in rapidly, and the ship could sink in minutes. Evidence supporting this theory: the wreck is broken into two pieces, though this could have happened when it hit bottom. Some structural analysis suggested the ship may have been subjected to stresses beyond its design limits in the extreme seas. No clear evidence of catastrophic hatch failure was found. Theory 3, grounding and damage. A third theory suggests the Fitzgerald may have struck an underwater shoal, shallow area, damaging the hull and allowing flooding. Lake Superior has many underwater features, and in the storm conditions with malfunctioning radar, it's possible the ship strayed off course and struck bottom in a shallow area. This could have torn open the hull, causing rapid flooding. Evidence supporting this theory: the ship was navigating closer to shore than usual due to taking the northern route. The ship's radar was malfunctioning, making precise navigation difficult. There are known shallow areas in the vicinity of the ship's route. However, most experts discount this theory because no evidence of grounding damage was found on the wreck. The water depth along the ship's known route should have been adequate. The Anderson, following a similar route, encountered no shallow water. Theory 4, rogue wave. Some have suggested that the Fitzgerald was struck by a rogue wave, an exceptionally large wave that overwhelmed the ship. In severe storms, wave patterns can occasionally combine to create a single massive wave, much larger than the prevailing seas. A 35 or 40-foot wave hitting the Fitzgerald could have broken over the deck with such force that it smashed hatches, struck the pilot house, potentially injuring or incapacitating the crew. In extreme cases, capsized or broke the ship. However, this theory has issues. The Anderson, relatively nearby, didn't report any exceptional waves. The ship appears to have sunk from flooding rather than capsizing. No evidence of catastrophic impact damage. The U.S. Coast Guard's official conclusion was that the Fitzgerald sank due to flooding, likely through damaged or improperly secured hatch covers, combined with loss of buoyancy. The NTSB disagreed with some aspects of the Coast Guard's findings and suggested structural failure may have played a role. The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened in those final minutes. What we do know is that the Edmund Fitzgerald encountered conditions at or beyond the limits of what Great Lakes freighters were designed to handle, and something flooding, structural failure, or a combination of factors caused the ship to sink with shocking speed. The loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald led to several changes in Great Lakes shipping. Improved weather forecasting. Better weather prediction and communication systems were implemented to help ships avoid the worst storms.